Hey, brassfacts here. There are almost no videos talking about fundamental night vision usage. YouTubers like myself like to talk about gear, why we use certain gear, scenarios, and even SOPs. But today I want to try something different. I'm by no means a high-speed operator, nor have I been that, nor done that, you name it. But I have spent an absurd amount of time under night vision. Last year, the brassfacts channel created about 6 hours of raw night vision footage, which equates to roughly 30 hours under night vision if we assumed a 1:5 ratio of filming to setup. I've used night vision in a wide range of environments, clearing abandoned structures, moonlit nights near cities, forests 100 miles away from any lighting source, while driving, and of course all of the above while shooting and in some cases force on force. Now, usage does not equate to experience, but I think I have a unique perspective in that I've spent more time under NV in more unique environments this year than most people will in their life. So, I want to teach you the fish, if you will. Most people are not as lucky as me to do what I do, so if I can pass on some of my experience in this field, you will be better informed and able to draw your own conclusions and understand why I draw the conclusions that I do. I'm going to assume you know how night vision works, so I'm going to skip a lot of basics and assume you're familiar with a lot of terminology. Today's focus is going to be primarily lighting conditions, active versus passive aiming in the context of shooting. Future videos will cover other aspects, but these two topics alone represent a very fundamental core of night vision employment, basically require an entire video in and of itself dedicated to them. The short of the context here is I'm talking about night vision for the usage in a grid down, SHTF, civil unrest, or whatever boogalian end of world scenario you can imagine. Not for stargazing with your girlfriend who is entirely uninterested and just wants to get back in the car. Anyways, I'll also leave out thermals. That's not to say that thermals don't impact the paradigm, they absolutely do, but it needs its own video, something, like and subscribe for future content. I'll also be making the following assumptions. Most people do not have night vision, but with the proliferation of night vision, enough people in the United States have it that it is prudent to assume that you meet anyone in the dark doing hood rat shit, they have night vision. The consequence of making the inverse assumption is very much a lethal one to get wrong, even if it is semi-unlikely statistically speaking. Finally, I want to make a point to give you the data, free from my conclusions until the end. But due to the nature of this, sometimes I do have to give some qualitative statements, which are opinion, such as max engagement range, max visual range, you name it.
One final aspect. A lot of the stuff on this channel is very hard to continuously do due to the price involved in testing these products. And while I could afford initial one-time night vision purchases, continuing doing this long term, especially with YouTube, is somewhat difficult without channel sponsors. Thus, this video is sponsored by Nightline Inc., a one-stop shop for night vision, tubes, and more. Nightline Inc. is one of the few wholesale providers of L3 and L-bit night vision tubes, providing for many of the well-known night vision dealers and manufacturers. As such, they not only have access to high-quality tubes, but can ensure they are stocked throughout industry ups and downs, get tubes out the door in a rapid fashion without month-long waits, and can stay price competitive without cutting corners. When you buy from Nightline, you will, as a rule, talk to a real person during the purchasing process to ensure you get exactly the tube you want, instead of playing slot machine checkout as you so often do. They've been viewers of the channel for quite some time and are a fan of the message. More importantly, the type of people we attract here, which is you guys, the serious prepared citizen. As such, they want to support the channel in these trying times, and they've helped with some night vision equipment that you might see on the channel, as well as some of the footage you see is going to be likely through their tubes. So next time you're looking to buy some night vision equipment, consider opening up a browser tab at Nightline. Or better yet, clicking the link down in the description. Yes, I do get some kickbacks. Thanks for supporting the channel, and thank you, Nightline. On with the show.
The most important thing to understand with night vision is not how much money you spend, it's not what your laser device is, it's the fact that lighting conditions guide everything. Military and LE can be fairly sure of lighting conditions, as operational areas are typically contained within the perimeter of a powered city, or in the context of operating in a larger team against an OPFOR with no night vision, meaning you could just blast out illuminators. As a civilian, you have no such luxury. You are at the mercy of the scenario and the environmental lighting. It is not a guarantee that the city you are in or near has power and thus is providing supplemental lighting. Night vision performance varies wildly with lighting conditions. It is not unrealistic that on a dark night with hot shit 5,000 per tube L3 white faucets, you can barely see precise detail beyond a couple feet, and everything just looks like large vague objects. Similarly, some nights or locations you can see in every direction for miles and can realistically see a moving human 700 plus yards away. It's all lighting dependent. Put bluntly, YouTube night vision footage is shot to look good, and is done so very often within city limits, on organized ranges, with supplemental lighting, at dusk or 40 minutes after dusk where it appears dark but it's actually extremely bright for a night vision device. No problem with this, I respect the hustle, just understand this may give you false impressions of what night vision footage actually looks like and what equipment works and does not work under dark conditions. Now, ultra bright conditions can exist in real life, but they do not exist as a rule. So basing any type of performance expectations or conclusions on this lighting condition can lead to very skewed views of night vision and ancillary accessories. Roughly speaking, I've quantified lighting conditions into very large and vague categories. Bright conditions. Bright is typically with a near full moon overhead anywhere within a city with power, or on an overcast night within about 20 miles of a powered city. You hear me mentioning cities a lot. Cities put out an extreme amount of light pollution, and if it's overcast especially, this light will reflect off the clouds and come back down and provide significant lighting for something like a night vision device. That's why a dark-ass city park actually just looks fucking amazing under NV. In these conditions, you don't need night vision to move, but you are benefited by night vision since you can see into shadows. Passive aiming works on basically all red dots, including the mediocre Chinese mystery meat ones here. Civilian power illuminators, including V-cell, are somewhat washed out in these conditions. Full power illuminators can cut through what is essentially a massive photonic barrier, but realistically, outside of shadows, your illuminator is typically unneeded. Active aiming, the act of using a laser, is limited by the power of your laser and the quality of your zero, but if the stars align, metaphorically, you can't see them, it's too bright, you're able to push out to 250 to 300 yards with consistent hits. Your visual range is easily several miles. The footage you see in the background was on a full moonlit night, with snow cover drastically increasing lighting conditions due to reflections. Alternatively, if you live anywhere near civilization, just walk outside your front door at night. This is what I would consider very bright conditions. The moon cycle implies these conditions should exist about 30% of the time, but in practice, later moons in the summer, overcast nights, inclement weather means this 30% is a lot more like 10%. In 23 night vision shooting trips this year, we had 4 nights that achieved this level of brightness when specifically seeking out these types of conditions. The next condition type is the intermediate condition. Functionally, it's very similar to a bright condition, but something has degraded the light source. So you have a moon, but it's behind clouds because it's overcast. You're in a shadowed area in a city, perhaps Murder Alley, indoors, or you're near a city, but you're in a rural blocked off area. Much of the functionality operating in this environment is unchanged, but the shadows are much deeper and significantly darker. You absolutely have moments where you stare at an object to figure out what exactly you're looking at as the contrast begins to flatten out. Passive aiming with a quality optic on low contrast targets is now limited to about 75 yards or less. Past this, you're going to play this game where you can kind of see the target with your night vision device, but then when you put your optic in front of you, it essentially vanishes and you're kind of shooting superimposed, which drastically impedes hit probability, especially with follow-up shots. Lower quality optics here, either due to poor transmission or poor brightness settings, or usually both, will begin to have issues. To maintain daylight speed and consistency, this is where you typically want to begin to use active aiming, which will get you to about 100 yards with something like a vampire light, so Surefire V, and about 100 to 300 yards with a dedicated laser aiming module, depending on if you're using Civ, V-cell, or full power. The issue here is actually primarily the lack of contrast versus simply seeing the target in the first place. From here we move on to dark conditions. This is when lighting sources are limited. Relative to a city, you're about 30 to 50 miles within a city, but there's no moon, or the moon is behind the mountain. Or you have a moon, but it's fully overcast. Or you have a complete moon, but the moon is 10 to 30 minutes over the horizon or mountain or whatever, and you get some splash lighting. About 50% of my nighttime escapades occur in these conditions. Your tubes are starting to struggle here. You're seeing a large amount of scintillations, or noise, and contrast is reduced substantially. If I had to put a vague number on it, without silhouetting, you can see movement at about 150 to 300 yards, and that's pretty generous. And you could potentially see further depending on contrast level, but non-stationary, non-silhouetted targets may very well appear invisible to you up close. Both eyes occluded shooting in this scenario often gives people the false illusion of better light transmission while passive aiming, but if you close one eye, you'll see that even with top shelf red dots or holographics, your range passively is about 30 to 40 yards, and that's pretty generous. You may gain a bit of range on extremely compromised targets, such as someone skylining, contrasting heavily, such as in an open field, or on a known target position. But realistically, seeing someone and lining up a good shot through an optic are two entirely different tasks. Active aiming with a civilian power laser, while faster and easily double or triple your passive aiming range, has issues in these conditions as well. And the wide focus of these devices combined with the weak power means at about 75 yards, you're going to start to struggle. And by 130 plus yards, the illuminator is relegated to a weak, expensive weight. This is the domain where full power or civilian V cells, and the D2, really begin to shine over civ power illuminators. Wee punny. And you'll have a noticeable easier time creating both the illumination required for a high confidence hit. It is important to note, most illuminators, even the civ power ones, will push lights to ranges well in excess of what you can realistically engage. But like with white lights, there is a threshold of light required to do a thing. It's very common to light up a target and have no idea you're actually on target because you're not creating enough contrast. This is where off-axis illumination, created by other sources or a teammate, specifically a laser illuminator, is incredibly useful as it creates a shadow that you can easily use to distinguish precisely where the target is, as it provides that contrast. And in fact, because the target is also illuminated, depending on the conditions, you don't actually need to light up your own illuminator and can instead passively piggyback, as in you use your passive aiming device on an illuminated target. Then we reach near blackout conditions. This is the situation where there is minimal lighting. A moon is over an hour away from coming over the horizon, no twilight is present, and you're distinctly well outside city limits, 50 miles plus. Very often you must also be in a forested or urban environment that has lost power. Your visual detection range of a moving object is only about 100 yards, or even less, perhaps even 30 yards if the backdrop exists in depth. You're approaching the point where you can essentially only move under nods, and even that is beginning to become very difficult. You're almost at the threshold where human night vision does not allow for movement. Practically speaking, even against those with night vision, if you move smart, no one will see you without thermals unless you basically walk into each other. Active laser illumination can be used here, but because it's so dark, it's a lot like using a white light without night vision in extremely dark environments. You can see the light or the cone created by the illuminator. And because detection range is very limited, you're going to leave your illuminator on for an uncomfortably long amount of time to actually find things that you may have seen. Think 5 seconds plus. There's also technically a condition called just blackout conditions. Yes, I made that name up. This exists when it gets dark enough, especially indoors, that your nods are basically useless. Without nods, you're going to roll up in a fetal position because you cannot see. You 100% need an IR source of light to function with night visions in these conditions. I've only really experienced this outdoors in a forest while camping, in a large ravine while trying to filter water in a riverbed. Indoor abandoned structures, for example, with no outside lighting coming in, also create this extremely regularly. Okay, that was our lighting conditions. It's the entire metric in which you should gauge your ability to perform and function under night vision. Blackout conditions or near blackout conditions are very useful in a defensive situation, where you're trying to move from one point to another while being combat averse. But even brighter conditions should not be viewed like a daytime analog that happens to be monochromatic in color. That brings us to your emissions, or how much signature you're putting out to achieve hits, suppression, or navigation. Passive versus active aiming, specifically outside of CQB, is a huge point of contention and discussion. To make an informed decision on when you should use which, you need to understand the trade-offs. To keep this video manageable, I'm going to be focusing primarily on passive and active shooting, that is, engaging a target. However, we cannot discount the act of passive approach and active approach, basically using an illuminator as a functional flashlight with no expectations of shooting in that moment. However, this is a very complex topic and we're going to leave that for another day. Both passive aiming and active aiming are vastly misunderstood by the community at large. Passive aiming actually puts out noticeable signature, and active aiming, depending on circumstance, puts out less than most internet forums would lead you to believe. Most of this discussion will be at about 50 to 70 yards or greater, depending on lighting conditions. As closer, we found that other factors play a far larger compromising effect, and you might as well just use your laser. Let's start real quick with passive because it's relatively simple. Passive, the act of aiming through your optic and not using any supplemental lighting. Leading up to the moment of shooting, you will obviously put out zero signature. You are undetectable unless someone literally sees you. However, once you shoot, the muzzle flash produced is very noticeable under night vision devices, even at 200 yards. It's worth noting I did this with a decent range of weapons, but I think more testing could be done in this area, specifically with short barrel optimized cartridges like 300 Blackout. But taking this data, for the duration of the string of fire, you will produce a comparable signature to that of an illuminator at the muzzle specifically, with obvious gaps between the shots. In our test, an off-axis person, simulating a OP4 teammate, could find the target very quickly, 2 to 5 seconds assuming semi-consistent strings of fire. This is obviously aided by the sound report of the firearm, even when suppressed. This isn't to say that in real-world circumstances with real stress, this would be easy. It's just that passive is not this brainless, simple, zero-emission solution that it's so often touted to be. That brings us to active aiming, with laser-based illuminators, as in not V-cell and not the D2 LED, more on those in a bit, gets fairly complicated. We are obviously inheriting the downside of the shot report and the signature present when passive shooting. But, and this is my opinion, the visual report is not additive, as in, when you start shooting, the muzzle flash, combined with the illuminator signature, do not create a brighter, more intense signature. Either reach a sufficient threshold to compromise your position, and both in conjunction don't make it worse. However, there is concern in regards to the moments before, between, and after shooting when the illuminator is on and shots are not going out. To understand active aiming and the emissions created by active aiming, we need to first address the laser. The notion that lasers are always video game-like, as in always drawing a straight line back to the shooter, is a misnomer. This is not always the case with full power lasers and almost never the case with civilian power lasers. Lasers are lasers, and in a sterile environment, they're not actually viewable. They are in-phase photons, and because you need photons to see things, you can't actually see it unless it hits a downrange surface or is presently frying your eyeball. But then you can't see it anyway because it's presently frying your eyeball. In the real world, air isn't clean. Your laser will hit dust particles, smoke, fog, worst of all, humidity, mainly because you now have to shoot in humidity, and no one should have to do that. But humidity tends to be omnipresent, and it's a very large contributing factor to creating the characteristic laser beam. Even in something like Utah, which has low humidity on average, low humidity, still combined with a very cold environment, can sometimes create a circumstance where the beam basically Star Wars is in. When you power down to sieve power, the beam, as a rule, is actually almost never visible. I have never seen a sieve power laser produce a characteristic laser beam for the length of travel from an outside observer unless the air was incredibly compromised, which only happened when I shot in Silent Hill fog conditions. Furthermore, because most laser aiming modules actually allow you to adjust intensity or use a diffuser cap, or both, this should actually never be an issue if you're smart about your laser usage. Thus, in my experience, the largest consistent compromising emission that you emit when using a laser, smartly, isn't the laser beam, but its splash created by the laser and illuminator. Because the laser and illuminator are imperfect and it exists at the back of a circular housing, you will notice that it splashes within this housing, and this cannot be mitigated. This light will manifest under nods at distance as a singular small orb, basically a concentrated light source and basically a halo around it. And as far as I know, all laser aiming modules, MAL, DIRV, D2, Civ lasers, the PAC-15, D-Ball, and more exhibit this. I have not messed with the OGL or the NGAL, but their designs seem to indicate this would be a problem here too. The orb behaves in a unique fashion as it is significantly directional dependent. This makes sense. We're viewing photon splash from the back of a cylinder. If the cylinder occludes some of this because, it's off axis, well, we're going to have reduced or no visibility of the splash coming out of the cylinder. In the footage, you can see a full power laser and a civilian power laser, we did both, ranging in a 90-degree arc all the way to direct on. As you can see, as the source approaches, roughly speaking, 50, maybe 75 degrees, it becomes incredibly faint. At the 60 to 75 degree mark, it almost entirely vanishes as it increases. This is on near blackout nights where the effects are exaggerated. On intermediate or brighter nights, this is virtually invisible sometimes compared to muzzle flashes in the 60 degree or more cone.
When the beam approaches close to 10 degrees, you will begin to notice a halo effect as the photons are going directly at you. However, it's worth noting this almost never occurs unless you are the intended target of the illuminator. Thus, most of the time it will appear simply as a singular dot. I think a better way of viewing full power laser illuminators versus sieve power in these conditions is not that one is more bright or obvious than the other. It's the threshold in which one of them will become more obvious than the second, assuming the full power is running at the full power setting. The civilian power laser is really only obvious at about 10 degrees, maybe 20 degrees, pointing towards the target. However, the full power laser becomes obvious, both the characteristic laser beam and the halo effect, at about 45 degrees or less. There is one other type of illumination splash that can occur, and it needs to be accounted for on both sides: ground splash. When you can see this splash on the ground, humans instinctively know how to deal with this. We see an elongated light splash, and we know follow it back to the source. However, this isn't always visible. Certain angles and conditions result in this splash being near invisible. Note how quickly it takes for this illuminator to fade if it peels even slightly away from what I can visually line of sight see. IR laser-based illuminator splash does not behave like a flashlight, as the light on target is incredibly concentrated. Thus, unless you can physically see the impact surface, as in where the light is specifically striking, which is difficult on uneven terrain, there will typically not be enough splash on other objects like grass, rocks, debris to really observe it secondhand if you can't see the direct splash site. You may, as a downrange subject, not have sufficient warning time to react, locate, and engage to cover your teammate who's being painted. The inverse is obviously also true. When you consider the OODA loop, it should be expected that against a competent adversary, a gunshot will be your first warning. This is not to say that active aiming solutions have no issues. They absolutely do. Real world means you're not always going to have optimal usage of the laser, dictated by circumstance, environment, or whatever that may be out of the shootie's hand. And this could allow for a split second of warning that you're about to be engaged. There's one final aspect to consider. In the footage, you may see this obnoxiously bright laser aiming module. This is not a full power laser. The full power laser behaves very similar to the sieve power laser, so much so that I'm actually having difficulty differentiating. This is a V-cell based illuminator, specifically the DIRV. V-cells have been touted as the savior for the civilian laser community, as it allows for a very bright illuminator at legal power levels because they're much more diffused. But this is a trade-off. This is very effective for shooting, but because the illuminator produces more of a flood versus lasers which produce a very tight cone, all previous assertions don't always hold true. The resulting signature is much more akin to how white light behaves even on lower power settings. This increased signature is on a sliding scale, with the non-focusable DIRV producing the biggest signature, both with on-ground splash and unwanted flood leading to the target. This is comparable to the signature of non-focusable 3-degree heads like the Kiji Z-Bolt IR head, US Night Vision IR head, and more. You can mitigate some of this by shooting from an elevated position, but we don't always pick our FFPs. The Snyder D2 is better in the premise that you can actually focus the beam quite tightly, to about 3 degrees as well, and the beam is much more in phase. Unfortunately, it's still observable from downrange and looks a lot like a flashlight versus the characteristic orb we discussed earlier, and is viewable from up to 70 degrees off-axis. Downrange signature is also far easier to see because these illuminators produce a lot of spill in the same manner a flashlight does. I have not used them all, but in testing I believe the performance would be slightly better than the D2 because its illuminator emitter housing is far narrower, but downrange performance-wise, the divergence is exactly the same, 3 degrees when fully focused, so I don't think it would change much there. So, those two topics, light level and emission, leave a lot to unpack when you consider your night vision game plan. Personally, I'd be the happiest, and you do care about my happiness, right? If you close the video now, let this information percolate, form your own opinion on what makes sense and what doesn't make sense, and then if you feel like it, you can come back and watch my conclusion. Alright, let's ride. For starters, most night vision usage should be oriented around avoiding the fight in the first place. As discussed,
Certain conditions can exist quite regularly where lighting conditions enable effective evasion against other night vision users. Remember, it's not at all like daytime conditions where you can see for miles with very good contrast. But we carry a rifle because we acknowledge the fact that sometimes we do have to stand and fight, we do have to return fire, or we cannot displace due to mission reasons. You can't pick your fight, you can't pick your circumstances all the time. For this context, I think you need both active aiming solutions and quality passive aiming solutions as a rule. Because passive aiming is so limited in application due to variable lighting conditions, I think relying on passive only is incredibly crippling, as the shit hit the fan scenario of choice does not care what you want and doesn't typically contain backlit ranges or even powered cities. Passive aiming does have utility in the darker conditions where it typically doesn't work, allowing return fire onto muzzle flashes or other laser aiming modules. But this is distinctly a reactive measure, while also compromising your position to a similar level. To really understand the trade-off of speed and accuracy from a laser aiming module compared to the reduced signature of passive aiming, the white light flashlights offer a compelling analog. There are many circumstances where information gained by the usage of a white light supersedes the assumed risk by essentially spotlighting your position. It is not a hot take to say that we think white lights are near mandatory on serious use firearms, even though, comparatively, it compromises your position far more than an IR illuminator does under night vision. In a lot of scenarios, you can see rough shapes, but not enough detail to pursue a passive aim shot without it being Hail Mary-like. There are many scenarios where you have a rough bearing on target but lack the information due to lighting to make a proper high percentage hit via passive, while a illuminator will provide you with that information with the trade-off of a slightly increased signature for a very brief moment in time. Remember, you're not just responsible for yourself, your emissions, and your condition, but also you're there to cover, enable, and basically, some cases, save your teammates to ultimately win or break off from the fight. So while lasers and muzzle flashes emit similar levels of emissions, laser illuminators are extremely directional dependent regarding compromising visibility, and passive aiming is very often limited in a lot of spectrums of conditions and ranges that it can be used in. I still think it's foolish to dismiss passive shooting wholesale. There are conditions where passive works very well, or the compromising effect of the laser and or illuminator is quite pronounced, or when the entirety of Op4 is directly in front of you in a very tight 10% cone. Or perhaps the precision and information needed from the illuminator is simply not needed or worth the trade-off. Maybe you're using a broad V-cell or LED illuminator, which typically have much more pronounced compromising effects. There are also scenarios where you simply just can't use a laser-based illuminator. Keyhole shooting, certain prone positions, and others come to mind, and that's just scratching the surface. I think the passive and active tools in your toolset are very much a yin and a yang. Dismissing either is a great way to put yourself in a position where you have no choice but to become a notable liability to your team and yourself. Now, it's worth noting, I don't have the perfect answer here. When exactly to use active, when exactly to use passive. In fact, I don't think really anyone has this solution, because the scenario we're preparing for is distinctly unique. It is not a military scenario. It is not a law enforcement scenario. It is a small unit tactics scenario put in a scenario that is quite rare in human society. There's a lot of other stuff I wanted to cover here today. In fact, I did cover it, but then the video was 57 minutes long and I still didn't get into the level of detail I'd like. So I truncated that, and that's going to become a video at a future date, assuming this thing does well at all and people are interested in that kind of stuff. In that video, I discuss gear choices, IR compliance on the gear, compromising effects such as watches, radios, and more, as well as usage of passive versus active for other things other than shooting. Among that, I also discuss techniques. Shooting at night is not the same as just shooting in the day with a laser. There are certain techniques you need to use, especially in failing lighting conditions, and much, much more. Perhaps I'll do it, perhaps I'll not. We'll see how this one does. Regardless, I need to get out of here. This video is way too long, took way too long, and yeah, I appreciate you guys, and I'll see you in the next one.
Hey. This is a vlog style here. Cameraman 61. Heading back in the dark if we don't trip and fall. Just did a little bit of bounding drill off that ridge over there. Almost tripped and died. No big deal. Practiced a little bit of communication, which falls apart as soon as you get a malfunction and your brain just decides to poop itself. But you know, that's how we learn, is we poop ourselves. And then we wear diapers next time. But